did not pass out of committee, and the first of those is entitled the Death Penalty Ballot Question Resolution. Whereas the death penalty has been documented to cost 3 times more than life without the possibility of parole, and in fact, the Dallas Morning News study indicates that approximately $2.4 million is spent for a death penalty case versus about $750,000 for life in prison. And whereas the death penalty carries a high risk of executing an innocent person, and in fact, 138 innocent people have been released from death rows across the country due to evidence of their wrongful conviction, including 12 in Texas. And whereas there is mounting evidence that Texas has already executed an innocent person, parentheses, strong evidence exists in at least 4 cases, and the Cameron Todd Willingham case has received much attention from the Texas Forensic Science Commission and from the media, close parentheses. And whereas other states are increasingly turning away from the death penalty as evidenced by the legislatures in New Jersey 2007, New Mexico 2009, and Illinois 2011, repealing the death penalty, and the Supreme Court of New York ruling it unconstitutional. And whereas juries and prosecutors across the nation and in Texas are opting against death in favor of life in prison without parole, resulting in a 70% decline in death sentences since 2003, and in 2010, Texas juries approved new death sentences in only 8 instances, which is the lowest number since the death penalty was reinstated in 1974. Therefore, be it resolved that the State Democratic Executive Committee approve the following referendum language to appear on the 2012 Democratic primary ballot. Because the death penalty is 3 times more expensive than life without parole, and because it is likely that Texas has executed innocent people, we should replace it with the punishment of life in prison without any chance of parole. Move the adoption of this, Mr. Chairman.
You heard the first part of the minority report. Is there discussion? Discussion. Mr. Bankston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I probably figure that I am the only one, or at least one of a very few in this room, who had the ultimate responsibility of asking a jury to sentence someone to death, and also the awesome responsibility of representing folks, defendants in death penalty cases. And over my 40 years of legal practice, I have come to see and believe that the death penalty is no longer appropriate. I've heard that this shouldn't be done because this will affect our elected officials. First of all, these referendum is not the position of the Democratic Party or our candidates. It is an opportunity for our voters to have a say on serious matters. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. We're better than the other party. We're better than they are. And the fact that it says, well, we can't win with these so-called moderate voters. Well, I actually don't believe there are any such voters in the state of Texas. But in any event, what do we tell our voters, our base voters who are black and African American, where our jails and death row are filled disproportionately with African Americans versus Anglo, where Hispanics are on death row in far different proportion to their population and versus the Anglo community. What do we tell those folks who believe that the death penalty is disproportionate to them? What do we tell the people in the family of Anthony Graves, who by the grace of God, a prosecutor finally realized that there was a terrible misjustice and freed him off death row? What do we tell those folks who are also our constituency? We can have the courage to talk and debate about real issues and important issues. You know, the other party, they put crap on their referendums on their ballot every year. Doesn't hurt them. You know, I've been told, oh, well, we're not smart enough to be able to fight them as they can fight us. Well, I think we've got some wordsmiths in this party who can speak up and say, this, first of all, is not the position of the party. It is the opportunity to let our constituency have a say-so in the important issues of the day. And it will bring more people here. And I close by saying, I heard some very great arguments for this in a blog that I read occasionally called WanitaJean.com. She's had more comments on her call to put these types of resolutions to try to increase voter turnout. And I guarantee you, she's watching and listening today.
Further discussion? Yes, ma'am. Oh,
My point is, and I don't know the procedure for this, so you have to help me with that. I just wanted to be sure that what we vote on does also reflect the racial disparity that is part of the death penalty in Texas. And I have some language for whereas to be considered by the committee. Whereas Texas is the national leader in the number of executions, with 66% of all people on Texas death row as non-white. Whereas 43 DNA exonerations have been won in Texas to date, according to the Innocence Project. And whereas, despite gains achieved since the Jim Crow era, the contemporary application of the death penalty in Texas continues a tradition of state-sanctioned theft of freedom and life in a manner that discriminates by race and ethnicity. That's my submission.
appreciate those comments, and I think they're highly appropriate. However, we cannot amend the report this time, add the whereas's. I'm so informed by the parliamentarian. Anyone who we've heard two for, any against at this point? Dr. Teal?
Don, I would be the first to hit the floor agreeing with you if we had the ability and the authority in this body to end the death penalty. We don't have the authority, nor do we have the ability to end the death penalty. We would have little influence, but maybe a little bit, if we had a House full of state Democratic representatives. You know, we'd have a little bit of influence if we had a Senate full of Democratic senators. But don't deceive yourself for a minute believing that passes this resolution does one single thing to change the law or to change the absurdity of the death penalty in Texas. What it will do is it will guarantee less Democrats hold office after 2012. That's the one thing it will guarantee with a certainty. There are certain parts of this state the death penalty is popular, certain part it's unpopular. God knows I don't understand how it can be popular anywhere. But the facts of the matter are our candidates need to deal with issues that will get them elected, not hot-button emotional issues that the Republicans can turn and use against all of our candidates. And they will do that with these propositions. It's a matter of, when you're thinking about these, of what do we have to gain and what do we have to lose. And with not one single resolution that you're going to hear do we have anything to gain, because we can't change the law. What we have to lose is more elected officials. Thank you.
Bergman.
I would like to speak against adoption of the minority report from a slightly different perspective from Dr. Teal. There was a time when I entered politics where the Democratic Party controlled almost everything root and branch, and something like this would have an important effect. Right now, these kinds of things in the Republican primary and in the Republican platform have a big effect. They terrorize Republican elected officials and Republican elected officials do a lot of stuff based on this sort of thing. Unfortunately, we're not that party. We can't pass the best legislation in the world. We write it. We can't block the worst legislation in the world. The Republicans are doing that every day. Our legislators are left scrambling for a few inches on the consent count. So I think we need to do something more thoughtful than just aping the Republicans or aping ourselves 50 years ago. Because that's not where we are. We have to use our precious power to get on the ballot, to accomplish things. Our voters are going to get sick and tired of voting for something that sounds like it does something, but actually accomplishes nothing. We have younger generations of voters who've never experienced anything I experienced. They look at the Republicans who do things, bad things, but they do things. And they look at us and we look ineffectual. And I think these kinds of measures on our primary ballot will have a demoralizing effect on our voters. If you want to couch this to make the mayor of Houston really uncomfortable about her goddamn crime lab that fabricates evidence in death penalty cases, I'm all for that. But all this does is put our sheriff and our legislators in a position of disappointing the voters they ought to have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. Frank?
So some of you out here would object to these various referenda, this one being first, but two others after this. Some of you are going to object to this on the grounds that it'll endanger our electoral chances. Well, let me ask you, you think it will endanger our chances of electing a new governor? What happened? You think this is going to endanger our chances of holding majority in the state house? We don't hold it. What exactly are we planning to lose here? This isn't going to cause us to lose anything because we don't have anything. Chairman Ritchie pointed out that we're fighting for principle. Principles such as equal justice or work or struggle. Communities of color suffer most under current laws like the death penalty, criminalization of marijuana. Ron Paul gets a lot of vote, the youth vote, just on the legalization of marijuana. I realize that is a particular issue at the moment, but it's something to think about. Democratic strategist Robert Creamer, who runs Congresswoman Janet Schwatkowski's campaigns, asserts that independent voters, such as those that supported George W. Bush in 2004, did so even as when they disagreed with his positions, because he showed he had the courage of his convictions. If our legislators, our candidates, I should say, are not out there showing the courage of their convictions, we're going to see another rout like we had in 2010. We need people to get up and tell people what they stand for. We need people to tell them what we stand for that people want to vote for even when they don't agree with them.
I want to